Hello, I'm Kiran and welcome to my woodworking channel. Stay tuned for the build of this bistro table or side table, however you want to call it, that has a round tabletop with sliding dovetails and half dovetail joinery with purple heart inlay. I started by building the leg templates first. I used my router elliptical jig to cut a nice elliptical arc for the leg's curved shape. I'm building this project with scraps and with no plans, so I improvised a lot as I built along. These freestyle builds are always a lot of fun, and it gives you a lot of scope to experiment with your builds, and it also helps to hone your skills. Once I got a decent arc profile, I removed the template, marked the other curved areas, cut everything on the bandsaw, and trued up the template at the router table. I'm using white oak to build the legs and the cross supports. I milled up the board, cut them to size, and got them ready for templating. I transferred the template markings and cut all the legs at the bandsaw. And here they are. I'm using a pattern bit and flush trim bit again to true up the legs. It's best to take it slow and do climb cuts to get very clean cuts. And then I marked locations for the domino and cut them out. Did a quick dry fit to get the top support part of the leg right. And then I installed dado stack on my table saw and cut the shoulders of the top support to get it ready for half lapping. I cleaned everything out. I marked out the half dovetail template and marked out the waist area and gang cut both sides once at the bandsaw. And some chisel work here to get the tails true to the lines. And then I transfer the marking to the legs and cut out the bulk of the waist area with a router. More chisel work to true everything up again. Once I was happy with the fit, I added a curvature to the top piece for aesthetic purposes. Then on to the glue up. After the glue up, I realized there's not much definition between two joining pieces, so I decided to add a purple heart inlay. Used my thin strip jig to cut out some thin pieces of purple heart that would be used as inlay pieces. I fit everything to perfect sizing by sanding and cutting. With the glue up, I'm using regular wood glue as well as CA glue so that it sets fast, and then I gave some gentle taps with a mallet. Once it dried, I sanded it flush. At this stage, I paused the base construction and moved on to the top because I'll be adding sliding dovetails, and without set plans, I need to make sure that the cross supports fit the top perfectly. I milled up a cherry board which will become the tabletop. I oriented the boards in a way that it looked nice and marked out the locations for the dominoes. The dominoes here are only for alignment purposes and do not add any strength. On to the glue up of the tabletop. Once the glue dried, I cleaned out the top with a chisel and a card scraper, and most importantly, this $12 Japanese kana style plane that I bought from Amazon. This is so much fun to use. Quick sanding, and then I went on to mark the locations for cutting the circle. I used my elliptical circle jig here again to cut out the circle. When you cut out the corners, save one of the scrap pieces because you'll be needing to cut a plug to cover the dovetail slot. And once the tabletop was trued up, I marked the locations for the sliding dovetails. Since I have only one router, first I used my upcut spiral bit to cut out a slot, transfer the bit height with the height gauge, and change the router bit to dovetail bit and transfer the height to that router bit, and ran through the channel with the dovetail bit installed. You want the fence to be at the same position throughout the entire process of cutting the slot here. As you can imagine, this was really tough because I only have one router. To change the bits and to transfer the height was really annoying. So after this build, I ordered another router because I see myself doing more and more sliding dovetails. I think the slot in the end came out really clean. Use the height gauge here again to set the bit to the same height. Install featherboard to hold the board flush against the fence and cut out the tails. I have left the board wider than it needs to be so that I can have good support to push it against the fence. After the initial cut was done, I added pieces of blue tape to offset and ran it through the fence again. This is so that the dovetails would slide a little bit easier. Quick test fit to make sure that it was sliding in both slots easily. As the bit was already set up, I used the scrap off from cutting the circle and cut out the plugs. Then I cut out the cross supports to the size at the table saw. My crosscut sled simplifies the process of cutting repetitive parts. Added curvature to the cross supports again to stay with the theme. I'm happy how these turned out. The elevated shoulders give a nice floating look. I dry fit the cross supports with the base to mark out the locations to cut the dominoes. It makes sense now why I stopped the base construction halfway through, because now I have exact positions to cut the dominoes. Without this, it would require tedious planning. The dominoes are inset more in the cross supports than in the base. Added light chamfer to all the pieces and heavy chamfer to the tabletop. On to the glue up. I'm only gluing up at one end, but since the grain directions match here, you could technically glue up the whole sliding dovetails. This is basically a foolproof way of framing this accurately. Otherwise, I had to create plans to accurately cut the slots for the dovetails, accurately measure the frame, but since I'm kind of rough building this, I kind of added the dominoes without glues. This is not glued in. This is just dry fit. But now I know the cross supports here are going to be actually glued to the tabletop. So those positions remain constant. That means that these frames go easily on each end. So that makes it simple. Once the tabletop glue dried, I removed the frame and then cut the plugs to the exact size. A lot of patience is required to cut this flush with the taper. You don't want to get this far and screw this up at this stage in the game. I was most anxious about the plug looking flush with the taper, and I'm really happy how it turned out. Final round of sanding for the frame, and I went on to add the finish. I'm using polyacrylic, and this is my first indoor project with polyacrylic. Not changing the color of the wood and quick drying time with a shop set to 55 Fahrenheit are the only true advantages of this finish. Otherwise, I still think the oil-based finishes are much superior. And finally glued everything up, and once the glue dried, I added the finish to the tabletop as well. After the finish cured, I added brie wax and buffed everything out by adding some elbow grease. Surprisingly, you'll find elbow grease in the pharmacy aisle with the painkillers than in the home improvement section in the supercenter. I took some 360-degree shots as the finish was curing, so this gives you a good close-up. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. And if you like the video, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. And please do consider subscribing to my channel. I'll see you on the next one.